Hi, Julie.
Hi, Dan.
Thank you for coming in today and going through the post-observation with me. We evaluated or observed last week, Tuesday, and I've been in the classroom before that as well during the Shakespeare unit on Hamlet. Looking back at the lesson last week, Tuesday, just kind of a reflection here of what did you feel went well during that lesson?
Based on the class I took last summer, the 17,000 classrooms can't be wrong. I told you about the rigor divide, that one of the lessons was on this idea that we can jump the rigor divide. And one of the things that kept coming back to me all the time is we need to have kids talk to each other more and teachers talk less. And so one of the things I did in this class was I organized, and the seating chart's kind of odd, but I organized them into pods, sort of, so that's their discussion pod. And instead of me asking questions to the big group, some of the deeper, the inference, the thinking questions, I turn over to them first and then have them discuss among themselves before we turn it back to, okay, what do you think? I also ask questions where, for instance, today we had a very short section that's leading into the very death scene at the end. It's a really a small section, but there's so much that happens. And I had them, after we had read that, I said, now pick out the 5 most important things in this passage we just watched. What do you think is really going to impact the end of the play? And so then they put together a list, and they have to then, to the rest of the group, justify what they put on their list and why.
Now, was there a certain strategy used in placing those students in those small groups?
I tried to I tried to put them in sort of mixed abilities, and I tried to mix who would talk a lot with some that wouldn't talk a lot. I've got several groups that function really well. I've got at least 2 groups that I'm not entirely happy about, and we're near enough the end that I haven't decided whether it's worth rearranging.
Now, it's interesting you say with the groups there, because you work with another teacher in the fall with the American Government Projects.
Yes.
Whereas he groups them based on ability.
And actually, I agree with that. When we base them there, we put them in ability because the top students really want to go after it, and they want to work hard, and they want to put together massively impressive performances. If you mix a kid who's not as interested in that group, they just suck off the work of others. We have found that in that particular project, if you put the kids who aren't as ambitious together, someone gets to work. And it's interesting when you have the kids that typically suck off the work of other kids, how frustrated they'll be to be the sucky. That they're the ones that are doing all the work and their buddies aren't helping them, which is an interesting dynamic to see. However, in this, the language is hard enough that I thought I needed some deep thinkers to spur on maybe the less deep thinkers, or they wouldn't go where I wanted them to go.
Have you seen any examples where those individuals that kind of ride the coattails have actually, thought of things differently for those deeper thinkers?
I don't think so, because one of the things that I'm unhappy about is that I'm sort of tethered because we lost the DVD players, and I'm using Amazon Prime. I bought the movie there, so I'm stuck with my cords to the projector. I don't circulate as much as I would like to, so I'm sort of stuck by my desk because of the projector. And we don't stop for short enough or long enough periods of time that it makes sense for me to get up, wander around. It'd be just like I'd be running around all the time, which feels awkward.
So such a device as an Apple TV?
Apple TV is the way to go.
Okay.
And, to be perfectly honest, and maybe I don't want everyone on the camera to know that, with speech and coming in at 6:30 and leaving very late, I haven't had time to tackle that.
Okay.
But that would be where I would like to move in the future, so that I could put myself in the center of the room to run the show, and all the action goes on around me, which means I could eavesdrop continuously.
And that's one of those teaching adjustments that we've made with the one-to-one is trying
Right.
to teach from behind more than teaching from up
And actually,
front.
that strategy works well. When we did Watership Down and I had the book clubs, I told them that I would be standing in the center and I'm gonna eavesdrop. I had one girl who said, "That's really creepy, you're like a stalker." And I said, "Well, we can do books and worksheets if you'd rather." No, she said, "Go ahead and stalk." So I wouldn't mind some stalking.
One of the things that we talked about in our pre-conference was the rigor divide from your class there, and really
Mhm.
trying to focus on your questions that you're asking during the class. After reviewing the selected verbatim document that I had shared with you, did you feel you met your goals, your expectations as far as a variety of questions, first of all, and then on the second part of that, trying to cross over on that rigor divide?
Based on the fact that I do a lot of this just as it comes to me, and
Mhm.
having taught Hamlet now, I'm in my 25th year, I was pleased to see that I had as many inference questions, thinking questions. Could there be more? Certainly.
Mhm.
And yeah,
But
there could.
and-
I don't think it's a bad mix. I think there could be more.
and there's still a balance between, understanding the facts, as we talked about prior, just the idea that the Hamlet itself is a playwright, and that understanding that is more difficult than just reading through it. It needs to be acted out there. So, and sometimes you need to have those facts.
And depending on where you are in the text, there are some parts of the text that are simply laying out what's happening. And were you there when they were at the funeral scene?
Yes, yep. I actually, I think
Okay,
it-
yeah, so
there's
there was a
better-
lot of debating about, is it suicide or is it not, and how suicide's handled, which we had touched on before.
Mhm,
Because Hamlet talks about he would commit suicide if he knew it wasn't a straight ticket to hell.
mhm.
So,
And I think one of the questions you asked too was with Ophelia, whether, did Horatio know that, she had committed suicide, and
Yeah.
when she had been buried in the cemetery, had he known that?
mhm.
So, okay. As you start to look for improvements, what are things that you would reflect on as far as things that you would change going into lesson again?
So you made this suggestion. What are some examples, or you talked about with a deliberate attempt to span this rigor divide. I have a study guide that they do, it becomes their homework, and it's
Okay.
just to keep them on top of what's happening and keep that fresh. I think it would be beneficial to have in my head, I would think of it as my rigor divide questions. And so maybe have a study guide that had all of my thinking, inference, my deep thought questions on there that they would keep in their books. In a perfect world, I'd hand out the questions every day. Unfortunately, I'm not good at controlling where I will be every period. We go until we're done, and then we start the next day. So there's no real, I'm going to do Act 3, Scene 2 today, and then, so it would almost have to be a study guide so that they would have them all at the right time. And so during discussion, I could say, turn to your rigor questions, or whatever I'd call them, and look at question 3. Discuss that in your group.
Good. I had shared with you also some excerpts of Kelly Gallagher's book of Regicide. One actually tied right to Hamlet,
Yeah, it was true funny that it was about Hamlet.
and the introduction of why it's important to read those academic texts in classrooms. And the other was within the guided tour versus a budgeted tour, kind of taking students from, leading them through the steps of it and modeling it, and then jumping on, or I would say transitioning to them being more independent. Thoughts on that possibly?
So I like the idea that we're gonna teach them to read first and then set them loose. My issue with this concept with Hamlet is that I think teachers for years and years and years, and it took me about halfway to where I am now to figure it out, that Shakespeare never wrote with the intention that anyone would read this. It was meant to be performed, and if we teach drama as text, we're missing an important component of Hamlet. Now, that doesn't mean you can't take out sections and teach sections as text or as poetry, but as a whole, it has to be drama. And the classes that I've taken really argue that we are doing children a huge disservice, well, children and teenagers, whatever, if we only teach text and they don't get to see it. And that in reality, one of the things teachers say is, well, I don't have time to show the whole movie. Well, even then, show bits and pieces, or show several different scenes. For instance, we're watching I've got a Kenneth Branagh version of the movie. It is every single word. It's over 4 hours long. It's not something you watch on a Saturday night. But we watch it and read at the same time, and they're expected to have their texts, and you will if you watch them. Sometimes they're reading, sometimes they're watching. They sort of get into a groove. And then at the end, I show them several of the big death scene where everyone dies at the end. We watch several different versions and do a compare and contrast about how do you understand the character differently in this version versus this version. Gertrude, Hamlet's mom, is especially fun to watch because in one version that I have, she seems to know that the king is trying to kill her son, and she deliberately poisons herself. Others play Gertrude as the bimbo wife who, oh look, I drank, oh, I'm gonna die now, too bad for me. But I really like the Gertrude who says, oh, I get this all, dang it, I'll show you, I will drink, in hopes of saving him. I like that.
I can relate to a similar experience where, the movie Hairspray is on television, or you rent the DVD and then going to Jan Hassan and watching it performed. Just the interpretation by the different
the
director.
motivations are different
Yeah.
characters.
And you kind of get a different feel there, and that's interesting that you bring that up about the playwright of Shakespeare and Hamlet, and how the students need to evaluate or understand that not everyone has the same interpretation. And we see that oftentimes in books and literature.
And that's that's the disadvantage of watching and reading, is they often say, oh, well, this is what happened. I said, wait a second. Because at one point, Ophelia is crazy, and she escapes because she has a key stuck in her mouth. Well, there's nothing in the text that says, hey, Ophelia stuck a key in her mouth and escaped. That's the playwright making it happen. So when they say, well, she had the key, and I said, wait a second, was that in the text? Oh, well, no, it wasn't. So we talked through some of those things about separating it. But that's hard to do for them, too, because it is very visual, and it should be.
And it's a difficult text to read as a poet, or poetry, so. One of the other things that we talked about throughout the post-observation, or what I saw within the classes, strengths that you've had during the coursework there, or during the class there. One thing I noticed, from the start, you got the kids started right away in the Moodle quiz about the previous day and the scenes that they had watched and evaluated.
You got that quiz, right?
Yep. You shared that with me, as well as the transition time. When students were done with the quiz, you closed it, and students take out your book and open up to Act 5, and it was just like a bunch of mice following, Chiefs down a road. Everyone closed their laptop lids and made that transition very smoothly. So I thought that both use of the time during the class and also during the transition was done very well. Challenge as you move forward here, that you see for yourself. You talked about the rigor divide.